All right, very good. It sounds like we have a solution to this problem. Yes.
But it also doesn't mean that they all have more than like 25 cents as well. So everybody here
Yeah.
broke, and that's all they do.
No, that's right. There's a presumption here that this is a small amount of money as opposed to a large amount, which is probably safe. Neither of these two look like they're starving to death. Anyway, Ashley, here you are. Congratulations. Okay, so let's move along. I want to switch gears now and stop talking about cardinal utility and start talking about something which is more central to the theory of demand, and that's marginal rates of substitution. So we've been talking about how additional resources or wealth or money, I'm going to use those all terms all sorts synonymously, might make people more happy. The cornerstone of demand theory, though, is not how happy stuff makes you. It's about the trade-offs that you make when you're trying to decide how to make yourself happy. And so we're going to talk about what's called a consumer's marginal rate of substitution. And so we should think of this as the rate at which you're willing to trade one good for another. So it could be that one of the goods is money and the other goods is food, for example. So your marginal rate of substitution in that case, let's make it more precise. Lunch is coming up. What do you guys do for lunch? Where do you go? You go to Subway? Okay. So, I forgot your name, I'm sorry. Sabrina, that's right. So Sabrina goes to Subway to get lunch, and she has to make a decision. There's variation in the prices of the meals she can buy at Subway, and she makes a decision about the trade-off she wants to make between dollars that can be used to buy other stuff and sandwiches, I suppose. Okay, so and the rate at which she is willing to make those trade-offs is the marginal rate of substitution between those dollars and between sandwiches, to take that example. Okay, so if we were to look at so the marginal rate of substitution for Sabrina, we could measure by looking at how many dollars she spends on a sandwich at lunchtime. All right, so that's a marginal rate of substitution. It doesn't have to be dollars. We got an example when we picked on Wes last Tuesday, where we were asking him to think about trade-offs between wine and coffee. So if you had the opportunity to trade a glass of wine, how much coffee would you require in order to be equally happy? That would be the rate at which you'd be willing to make that trade-off. Okay, so I just said you'd be equally. We're going to think about the rate at which you'd be willing to trade goods yet remain equally happy. That should start a little bell in your head and make you think of the phrase indifference curve, because the indifference curve, remember, is the locus of points where you're equally happy. There it is. Okay, I see it. It's too far away. So it should be related to the indifference curve. That's the locus of points where you're indifferent. So one very useful way of thinking about the marginal rate of substitution is what the slope of your indifference curve is at a point as you move along the indifference curve. Okay, so let me move along. I'm going to put one of these screens so I can draw some pictures. Okay, so you won't be surprised by the figure I'm going to draw now. I'm going to draw a commodity space. I'm going to call the goods x1 and x2. I'm going to imagine that we have a consumer and with a particular indifference curve. So let's call this an indifference curve that has a level of utility u not associated with it. There are, of course, higher indifference curves for the consumer as well as lower. I'm going to call this one u1. I'll leave out a lower one than this. And let's imagine that right now the consumer has a bundle, which we'll mark with the letter A here. And so if he consumes this bundle A, he gets a level of utility u naught, and he's sort of at this point on his indifference curve. Now the marginal rate of substitution is the rate which he's willing to trade stuff off is related to the slope of the indifference curve here. So at this point A, he's willing to trade about 1 unit of x1 for 1 unit of x2. Now, how is that different from if he was at a point up here, for example? Let's call this bundle B. What's the rate at which you'd be willing to trade x1 and x2 if you were located at B instead of A? So up at this point, look what he's doing. At this point, he's consuming a lot more x2 than x1. And as a consequence of that, the shape of the indifference curves, if to make this person equally happy, that is, keep them on the same indifference curve, you have to give them a lot more x2 in order to induce them to give up a little bit of x1. So you can think of this as a consumer with indifference curves having this shape prefers to sort of be in the middle here in some sense. If you push them off to the edges, they're going to demand higher and higher marginal rate of substitution between the two goods. Is going to be required to keep them happy. Okay, so that's the idea here. The shape of the indifference curve and the slope of the indifference curve in particular tells us about the rate at which the consumer is willing to exchange these two different goods. Okay, so here's some other examples of indifference curves. So I've shown you this one. Let's talk our way through these a little bit first. So look at this first panel. So this is this panel A has some indifference curves. They're kind of shaped like the curves here. I want you to sort of imagine that you're endowed with preferences and so indifference curves that look like these. Okay, for a moment. So suppose you have those indifference curves, and let's suppose also that you're at a point like this. That you're currently at that consumption point. So we've sort of already talked our way through this. But how would you, if somebody approached you and said, "Hey, I'll give you some x2 if you'll give me some x1," how would you respond to that proposal? Yeah, if you were sort of here where the slope of this curve is about -1, you'd be willing to make a roughly even exchange. You'd trade off x1 for x2 at a rate of 1 to 1. In contrast, if you were down here, what would you do? Yeah, you need to, if you were down here, so you're consuming a lot more x1 than x2, you demand quite a large additional increment of x1 in order to give up a little bit of x2. And that's what would be required to make you happy. Okay. Now let me ask you another question. Can you think of your own preferences now? Can you think of a pair of goods where you think where your own indifference curves kind of have this shape? Yes, right. Food and water, maybe? Okay, so Brian suggests, yeah, food and water, those sort of tend to go together well when you're eating a meal, for example. That's good. Other examples? Yeah.
Tea and coffee, something like that.
Perhaps tea and coffee. Might be. Is that true if you drink both tea and coffee? Yeah. That's possible. For other people, those might be more substitutes. I'm not sure. Ashley. Oh, nice. Okay. So if you, what sorts of cheeses would you mix?
Sharp cheddar, or do you want some mozzarella?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you might put those together. Sure. So although some kind of cheeses really wouldn't go well together on a sandwich. So. Okay. Other examples? Yeah. Oh, I'm going to come back to that one. Okay, let me come back to that one. Actually, I don't like that one for this one, but we'll return to that. Actually, we know from Tuesday that Wes's indifference curves for wine and coffee look kind of like this. We traced those out already. Yes. Milk and cereal, perhaps. That's good. Okay, those are all good examples. Let's turn our attention to this one now. So this is a case where the slope of the indifference curves is constant, right? For each one of these indifference curves has a constant slope. So as a consequence, if you were at a point like this and somebody approached you and said, hey, do you want to trade some x1 for x2? You'd say, what would you do? You'd be willing to accept a one-for-one trade. And it wouldn't matter how much x1 or x2 you had, anywhere you were in the space you wanted to make that trade. Okay, so let's take a moment again and engage in a little introspection. And you think of yourself now, think for yourself of a pair of commodities where you think your indifference curves might look kind of like that, might have straight lines. Yes? Okay, nice example. So you told me your name before. Tell me again. Say? Chris. Did you tell me your name before? Okay, yeah, Chris. Okay, but I'm bad at names. I'll keep working on it. So Chris says, Chris is indifferent between Coke or Pepsi. If we give him a bottle of a cola, he doesn't care which it is. So we say, hey, Chris, you want to trade a Pepsi for a Coke? I'll say, yeah, sure. And it doesn't matter how much Coke he has or how much Pepsi he has. They're perfect substitutes for Chris. Okay, another example? Butter and margarine for some people? Good. Yes, Eric? Okay, that's good. Yeah, I like that. So I would say, yeah, so the units would be a little bit funny here. A more natural way to do that would be to have straight lines. But if you were going to think about the trade-off between nickels and quarters, or nickels and dimes, let's do that. So let's say the next one is nickels, next to is dimes. What would the indifference curves look like? I heard a relevant answer. What was it? Yeah, so the slope would be, they'd still be straight lines, but the slope would be 2 in absolute value, -2. Because you'd be willing, most of us would be willing to trade roughly 2 nickels for 1 dime. Okay. Or maybe a little bit less. It's kind of a hassle to carry around 2 nickels, right? So you still have, but I think you'd still have a straight indifference curve. It would just be a little bit less steeply sloped than 2. Okay, other examples? Yes? Perhaps liquid soap and bar soap? Very good. Okay, yeah, these are all good examples of things that are perfect substitutes. Oh, I need to move along. Okay, so let's go. So here, let's look at C here. This is in a way sort of the exact opposite of this. Somebody give me some intuition about what's going on with these indifference curves. Yes? Oh, that's a good question. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember your name, but Lydia, that's right. So Lydia says, gee, doesn't this violate enunciation? And the answer is, yeah, it does actually. It sort of would satisfy a slightly weaker version of it. But the problem here is that if we give this person, each one of these lines involves this identical level of utility, and so if you're at a point like this and get a little bit more x1, you're not better off. So you don't always prefer more. You're indifferent between having more or not if you move along here. So that's a useful reminder that the axioms are assumptions. They're not sort of laws about human behavior. They're things we assume about behavior. Okay, so all right, let's set that aside for the moment. Yes. There we go. That's the okay. Very good. So and you told me your name before too, but Shu. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so Shu gives a left shoe, right shoe example here. So walk us through the logic a little bit, Shu.
So if I have 2 or 3 right shoes and 1 left shoe,
That's right. That's very good. So if you have three right shoes and 1 left shoe, you still got 1 pair of shoes, and the other 2 shoes don't really have much value for you. So you'd maybe be on this indifference curve with 1 pair of shoes, and you wouldn't be willing to pay anything for just 1 extra left shoe. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So we should bear in mind that we're going to think about production later on this semester. Should really sort of stay in the consumer mode for thinking about introspection for these right now. Yeah. Yes. I was going to come to that. That's a good question. So the marginal rate substitution we said already is going to be like the slope of the indifference curves. So here that's well defined. Here that's well defined. Here it's well defined. Actually, what is it here? Well, it's yeah, infinity maybe. 0 here. But right at this corner, the slope isn't defined. So the marginal rate of substitution isn't defined at that point either. Okay, good. Yeah, so this is the case. If you have indifference curves like this, these are sometimes called, these goods would be called perfect complements. You only care about consuming the good at all if you can combine them in a sort of fixed proportion, like 1 left shoe, 1 right shoe. Okay. And then finally, what about these? There's nothing wrong with these. They satisfy the axioms. They're a little hard to think about, though, I think. Well, that slope maybe never quite gets that far, but this is a case where you sort of are willing to trade. In this case, you sort of prefer to be in the middle. You'd be willing to trade off stuff 1 for 1 here, but you demand more favorable terms of exchange out toward the corners. The opposite is true here. Yeah, Kevin.
But this one, for instance, maybe like the vegetable almost, it's not, the midpoint one's perfectly right. In the beginning, it's edible the entire time. However, it's most valuable in the beginning. It starts to rot. It's too ripe in the beginning. It starts to rot at the end.
I think I would think of ripe vegetables and rotten vegetables as distinct commodities. So I don't want to go with that one, actually. We should think of, yeah, no, I don't like that one for this. This is a hard example. This is one where you sort of tend to prefer to go to extremes. Yeah, Brian, do you have an example?
Maybe this is the food and water. If you have too much water, not enough food, you're hungry, you got enough food. If you get too much water, you lose too much more water. But right in the middle is the perfect match.
Yeah, I think that's this one. I think this one is more like food and heroin. So the idea is if you consume a lot of heroin, your willingness to trade a little bit of heroin for a lot of food, you might demand really a lot of food to do that. You'd really rather have even a little bit more heroin. So that might be an example. I think it's hard to come up with examples. I find it difficult to come up with good examples. Yeah. So here's a question. So we need to be careful. I'm glad you raised that question. So these are still goods. It's not that these are undesirable. It's just that you prefer not to. You sort of prefer not to eat them, to consume them together. You'd rather have one or the other. And that doesn't mean that they're undesirable. It just means that as you get more and more of good X1, it becomes even more and more enticing. And it's not that the other good is not valuable. It's just less valuable to you relative to the good you're consuming more of. Yeah.
Maybe it's like heroin in time with your mother.
Hillary suggests heroin in time with your mother. Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, so I'm actually going to stop there because I want to take a few moments to stay in your seat for a second. I want to go back to our administrative item we talked about at the beginning of the class. If you're not in a study group, or if you're unhappy with the study group you're in, why don't you come up front here and chat? You really should leave here with somebody else to study with.